Hi, everybody, and welcome to Just Saying. It is October 21st, 2013. 10 more days of spectacular, tormenting people. I am joined here tonight, as I am every Monday night, by my lovely, vivacious, and oh so smiley co-host, Mary. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Kim.
How are you?
Well, hello, everybody.
Well, hi, Tim.
Oh, okay. Hi, Tim. Let's just get going.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to say hi yet or not.
I was saying hi, Kim, but you know what? I'll say hi to you, too. What the heck? One big friendly bunch.
I'm always barging in where I'm not supposed to be. I apologize.
Do the intros, and we'll do our intros at the extros.
We're going to have to sprinkle him with holy glitter and make him quit.
Well, do the intros, Kim. We'll extros with our intros at the end.
Well, our lovely voice from beyond this evening is our guest for the evening, Mr. Tim Yancy. Hi, Tim.
Okay, this is the part where I'm supposed to talk now. You said Kim, and I thought you said Tim, so I barged right in. I apologize. It has been a hectic day for us, and I called in like 3 seconds before the show begins, so I'm afraid you're already not catching me at my best, and my apologies for that, but thanks for having me on. How is everybody doing?
I'm doing fine. And KIM, how are you doing?
Yeah.
I'm cold.
Yeah. Well, you know, we woke up to 36 degrees today in frost. I'm like, I don't want it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's not quite that cold. I think when I went to work it was 55
she's over there,
this morning.
TIM, wearing sweater, and I'm just normal. So she's extra cold.
That's amazing. Well, you know, we haven't even got a concept of the fact that it's winter or that it's cold or that it's fall yet. I live in South Florida, and nothing has changed yet. We're still in those really hot, warm, humid days. So for me to even imagine it's 30-something degrees someplace is crazy so far.
The last I looked, well, it wasn't the last I looked because we all live on Facebook. A couple days ago,
Right.
Somebody posted something about the national weather, whatever. And they showed you this map, and it had all the different colors, and it was showing that there's supposed to be like this major nor'easter hitting us Thursday, which could be a winter storm. So I'm like, I'm not ready for that.
Well,
my history. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we're here in South Florida. We're still getting hurricane alerts from the heat of the tropics there. So,
right. Well, your
very
hurricane
interesting.
alerts usually end up coming up in my direction. I'm outside of Philadelphia.
Yeah,
So we've
been really lucky.
well, up until a week
by now you've got at least 2 under your belt.
Absolutely. The last hurricanes we went through, I was actually in North Carolina with George Lutz, who is the guy that lived in the Amityville Horror House. And he was with Mary Pasquarella Downey, who was one of the first investigators who went in there. And we were in North Carolina, and I'm watching this hurricane, and it's ripping. It rips past Florida. It goes underneath it, down by Cuba, and it goes out into the Gulf. And they said, see, you don't even have to worry about it. Your house is going to be fine. And that night, did a complete U-turn, spun around in the Gulf, and came back and hit my house dead center. So it was not a great adventure for hurricanes. So I'm really glad we've been blessed out here. We've missed the bad weather for the last few years, and it's been real nice.
Well, hopefully it'll continue for you. We're hoping up here to dodge the bullet. The Farmer's Almanac has suggested that we should look out. We're in the winter of our lives coming up. So maybe we'll move down to Florida with you.
Well, hey, we got plenty of couches and, spare bedrooms, so you're more than welcome. Come on down.
You just might see us down there.
road trip.
Yeah. You just see everybody listening to this show tonight. In about 48 hours, you'll hear all this screeching and horns honking. Everybody's out in front of your house because you have all these rooms and sofas and You're going to be sorry you put that out there.
And he has lots of cats, Mary. You'll feel right at
We'll
home.
find somebody that's a good cook because I suck at cooking. So if there's any good cooks, come on down.
Mary,
Well, Yeti's a good cook.
Mary, he has lots
There you
of
go.
cats, so you should feel right at home there.
You have lots of cats, do you?
Me?
Yeah.
Cats? No, I only got 8. You can believe that? We actually have 8 cats. Trish, first and foremost, is a mother to all things. And she just has a way. I call our house sometimes Kiddling the Island Misfit Toys because it seems we get every abuse case in the world shows up at our door. And she just has a habit of finding cats that get themselves into trouble. We were at the last time we had some friends down from some paranormal community friends, and they went to Publix with us, and they heard a bird chirping in the bushes, and Trish walks over, being the mom that she is, and goes, hello, and this cat comes flying out, climbs up her chest onto her shoulder, and it was a cat, it wasn't a bird. So that's how it usually happens in our house. And so we now have, of course, I have a huge 2-story house, so it's not as noticeable as it would be in most households, but there's 8 of them little boogers in there, and all of them are strange abuse cases like that. We had one day it was pouring rain. I mean, the worst thunderstorm you ever saw in Florida. And I look out the back. I'm actually standing out back watching the rain because it was just so intense of a storm. And Trish comes out with me, and out of the blue, here comes a cat walking very slowly across our backyard, right up to her in the pouring rain. You know, so he was cat number 7. It's very interesting the way that she seems to find those types of things.
Well, you know, once you're into cats, I'm a cat person too. And if you ever catch, I don't know if you ever see some of the stuff I post, but it's mostly cat stuff. Right now I currently have 5. The most I've ever had of my own were 7, but I've had at least 15 at once, and that's 2 mommy cats with kittens that I was taking care of, the mommy cats. So right now I'm hoovering at 5, and there's a reason for that. My husband has 2 motorcycles, and we're on a 2 to 1 we're on a 2 to 1 ratio here. For every 2 cats I have, he gets a motorcycle. So if I bring any one more, here comes a Harley. That Harley's getting pulled into the garage.
Right.
So I have to behave myself. Anyway.
Yeah. Very good.
So Kim tells me you are our Bell Witch expert.
I know a thing or two about the Bell Witch. And let me tell you how that all came to be. When I was younger, most people know that when I was younger, my family and I went through and we experienced a pretty violent haunting that happened to us. I was very young when it first started, like 6, 7 years old, somewhere around in there. And as I realized that this wasn't something normal, that it was unusual, this thing that was happening to us, that it didn't happen to other families, I became very scared. It was very violent. We were scratched, bitten, shaken out of bed in the middle of the night. Real violent, fear-based scenarios that were happening to us. My mom was attacked, that type of thing. So trying to make sense of it, I began to read whatever I could in our school libraries, and I would go to the municipal libraries, and I found this case that seemed to be everything that was happening to us. There was a couple of them. One was the Amityville Horror, and the other was this thing called the Bell Witch. The Bell Witch case happened a long time ago, started in 1817. John Bell, at the time, was the father of 7 children. He was 68 years old. He had a 1,000-acre farm in Tennessee, and something began pounding on the back door late at night. There was a commonality that happened for us in there, and what made me study that case intensely was that I think that whatever happened to us came from outside into our house. It was something I think that was on the property or in the woods around our home, and it moved in. much like the Bell Witch case did. So that began an intense study of what happened. It's a fascinating case. It is the first case recognized by a state legislature or the state commonwealth as a poltergeist or a witch having killed its intended victim. That's on record. It's also one of the very first cases that I've ever heard of. It may be the first case, I don't know, where the entity manifested a voice or a larynx. It was capable of speaking. So it has all of those ingredients. It's probably the most intensive, frightening, maximum impact, violent hauntings that you'll probably ever find out there.
Well, and it also had Andrew Jackson involved in it, so that just adds to it.
True. That is in dispute to an extent. There are no actual, well, I think that there is a historian who did find a link between them, but that for a long time there was no actual writings, nothing in Andrew Jackson's paperwork to ever show that he actually visited the Bell Witch farm. But there is a story that Andrew Jackson and his men had heard about the Bell Witch. This thing was huge. You have to understand that at the time of this haunting, the entire town knew of it. Local towns were experiencing phenomenon from it as well. It was just a monstrous thing. Eventually, the family's troubles began to leak. People started talking about it. They had gone to their neighbors, the Johnstons, and talked about this case, and the Johnstons came over and they tried to actually exorcise this thing. They had, big rituals over there, and the entity, all it did was it responded by slapping Betsy Bell around again, that type of thing. So eventually word got out, and it said that Andrew Jackson and his men actually came to the farm, that Andrew Jackson was in a carriage, and they were talking about the Bell Witch, and that the carriage wheels actually stopped in their tracks, and that the carriage wouldn't move until someone finally pleaded to the witch to let the carriage wheels go, and it started moving again. No explanation for that. And it said that Andrew Jackson actually camped in a field next to the home so as not to disturb the family, but that he witnessed a lot of the phenomenon that was occurring, that he heard the voices, that he heard and saw strange things there. And he said, it's quoted to Andrew Jackson, him saying, "I'd rather take on the whole Union Army than to battle with the Bell Witch." So there is no actual paperwork to show, no proof, no documentation that he was ever there, but that story is hugely popular. And there is a descendant of the Bell family who is a historian and has done a lot of extensive work on this. And the last time I talked to him a few years ago, he said that he had begun to unearth a possible link, and I'll have to find out more information and get back to you on that, that he was beginning to find some documentation that may prove that Andrew Jackson was there.
Well, the actual story I heard was he was not necessarily heading there, but passing through the area, and his carriage, I guess, the wheels got stuck in the mud and they could not get it out.
Right.
I also read one earlier that as they got closer, a lot of his men were getting sick and he was feeling uneasy, so they decided to just turn around and it wasn't worth it.
Interesting. Yeah, the standard story is that they did visit, that they did camp in a field nearby, that several of the men there did witness the phenomenon, including Jackson himself. And that quote, he'd rather take on the whole Union Army than to battle the Bell Witch, is attributed to him. So it's one of those things, because there's no actual documentation about it. It's filtered around and changed over the years. There's different variations of it, but the general story still stands.
So what's the story with this lady that they call her Kate Batts? Was there an issue involving like real estate, which got her really upset with John Bell?
Sure. I think where we probably need to start is at the root of the story and kind of give a general overview of it and explain that the witch was attributed to several entities, one called Black Dog, one called, different names, but it gave itself different names. This thing had a voice, and it was able to talk, and it talked to people, and it would identify itself as various things. One, a Native American Indian spirit named Black Dog, several different entities. But one of them that it called itself was Kate Batts Witch. Kate Batts was a kind of an eccentric neighbor of the Johnsons, and they had been actually involved in a land dispute, a land deal that ended up going to court. And it was said that Kate Batts had summoned up this entity, Kate Batts Witch, to torment Bell. There was a land dispute. We do know that. We know that John Bell was actually an elder of the church that he belonged to, and that he was actually ostracized from the church as a result of this land dispute that happened with Kate Batts. I don't know what the actual outcome of all of that was, unfortunately. I don't know if that's ever been told in the story, but we know that he was ostracized from the church, and that it created a lot of problems for him, this little kind of Hatfields and McCoy's feud that he had with his neighbor, Kate Batts.
Actually,
I remember something about that. Go ahead, Ken, I'm sorry.
Actually, what I read recently was he was actually eventually indicted in that case, but he never served time.
You're right. I believe that it was found that there was a dispute and that he was negligent and found guilty, that as a result he was ostracized from his church.
Right.
As one of the elders of the church. So I know that Kate Batts was kind of an eccentric and odd lady. She was an elderly woman that had been involved in this land dispute with him at the time. So a lot of people attribute it to that. What the actual story is, where this entity comes from, there's a lot of different, it has a lot of different origins, a lot of different roots. There's stories that his kids were farming, and they were tilling the soil, tilling the ground, and that the plow blade hit what they thought was a rock, and they pulled it up, and it turned out to be a skull that had been buried into the earth, and they took the skull back to the property, back to the cabin, and John Bell saw it on the front porch, and he told him immediately to go back and put it where it was. They had been playing about with it on the front porch somewhat, and one of the tooth of the skull became dislodged, and it fell between a crack in the porch, and then it wasn't found. And they think that could have been the catalyst for the haunting, because one time the voice said that it was an entity, a spirit of a Native American whose name was Black Dog, that type of thing. So has several different origins. Where it started was in 1817. John Bell was actually hunting on his property, and he was moving between the rows of corn. For people who aren't familiar, deer love corn. There's a lot of hunters that I know down here who grow corn on property, on hunting camps, just so that they can go up and hunt the deer that come in and feed off of it. Yep. So he was hunting between the rows of corn, and he came upon this unusual animal. There was a strange animal. He described it as a cross between a rabbit and a pig, or a dog, something like that. It was this bizarre hybrid animal that he had never seen before. He fired at it with his gun as he stood between the rows of corn, but the creature never moved. It just sat there and stared back at him. He began to walk towards this creature, and it completely disappeared. It vanished in front of his eyes. It didn't run away. It actually vanished in front of his eyes. That was kind of the first odd incident that happened. Other incidents, like most violent hauntings, it began to escalate pretty rapidly. They would hear John Bell would settle into bed next to his wife Lucy about 10 o'clock, somewhere around in there. And usually about an hour after they had gone to bed, they would hear pounding on the back door. something would be banging on the back door. John Bell would get up, light a candle, hastily run to the back door and open it, and there'd be nobody there. He would settle back into bed, and again, there would be pounding at the back door. There was a trickery was assumed, and watch was kept, that type of thing, but they could never find anyone who was banging on the back door. They tried several times to find out who this trickster was, but no matter how quick they got there, or if somebody tried to keep watch through the window, that type of thing, there was nobody ever there when the pounding was happening. It began to turn into what they described as invisible stones being thrown onto the roof and rolling off of the roof in the middle of the night. Inside, at some point, this thing began to come into the house, and they would hear the sounds of what they described as rats chewing or rats gnawing on the bedpost at night. They literally heard the old cliche sound of chains rattling inside the home. That type of phenomenon was going on and happening, and it was pretty frightening for them as a family.
I guess so. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit, and apparently, I think it was like 7 years before this spirit, as they're saying, appeared to Lucy Bell and said, I'll be back in 7 years. And then she came back, and I can understand if John Bell did Kate Batts wrong. Let me rephrase this. Do you think that Kate Batts, well, she probably was a real person. Do you think she got the rap for all this, and there was actually some kind of spirit to begin with, and because of the altercation between John Bell and Kate Batts, she kind of got blamed for it?
I think that's exactly what happened. I don't think Kate Batts had the ability nor the want to manifest some sort of an entity. You think of a curse or something like that was going on. I don't think that was the case. We don't know exactly what it was that brought this down on what the catalyst was or what the trigger was that brought this down. But I can tell you that it caused endless hardship. It could have been, you have a guy like John Bell who back then was very devoted, very devout member of his church. He was an elder there. And then suddenly he finds himself ostracized from his church. And a lot of people think that it was that created this scenario and kind of opened the door for this dark energy to come in and attach itself to the family, that they were already kind of off center or off balance, if you will, as a result of that. He was clearly separated from his faith. He had this hardship of dealing with this thing of, a land dispute. Plus, there was some stuff going on inside the family with Betsy Bell. Betsy was the youngest daughter. She was involved in a relationship with her former kindergarten teacher. The man's name escapes me right now. I don't have notes in front of me.
Is it Joshua Gardner?
Josh Gardner. Josh Gardner, that's it. And she was actually involved and scheduled to marry Josh Gardner. There are some people who say that maybe it was Josh Gardner himself who was the one banging on the door in the middle of the night, that type of thing. There have also been rumors of an incestuous relationship between John Bell and the daughters, that type of thing. So we know that there was dysfunction in the family. We know that there was a huge split between him and the church, and that he was isolated from his spiritual food, so to speak. And some people think that kind of opened up the door for this entity to move in.
Well, they say that a lot of times that prepubescent or early teen girls have a tendency to draw it ghosts, basically.
Especially poltergeist.
Right. And according to what I was reading, it went after John, basically. But Betsy was its second target. Like, Lucy and the kids
Sure.
were fine, and she loved Lucy, but for some reason Betsy was targeted, and I was wondering if that didn't have anything to do with her age itself.
Right. It seems like along the timeline of this haunting that it seemed to attach itself to different people inside the family. I can tell you in my case that that's what happened. This thing first took an immediate interest in my brother. Over time, that changed, and this thing began to focus its attacks and its intensity on my mother. So I think that may be the case as to what happened here. This thing initially, its focus seemed to be on Betsy. She began having fits. She would wake up in the middle of the night and be slapped, be thrown around the room. She would go into seizures. She would go into trance-like states. That type of thing was happening to her. And then, as the haunting progressed towards its end, it seemed to focus on John Bell. We know this for certain, that there was an entity and that it had a voice and that it spoke, that it stated several times that it had intended to kill John Bell. For this witch, whatever it was, it absolutely hated John Bell. Eventually, it was credited with his death, and his last day was a particularly tormented one on this earth. We can talk about that. It sang songs of glee. It claimed that it did it at his funeral, and it sang songs about killing John Bell. And you're right, it did state that it would come back in 7 years and visit the family. That's interesting, too, in that for some reason in these things, Ryan Newell, who is with Paranormal State, has talked about a reoccurrence where this thing comes back every few years to torment him, that he was involved in a violent haunting. I know Lou Gentili talked about that as well. As a child, he went through a violent haunting. Lou Gentili was a paranormal investigator and a demonologist, lay demonologist for years. And he even mentioned every 7 years this came back. I have seen that cycle in my life as well, where this thing kind of waxes and wanes. So it's interesting that you had mentioned that, because it does seem to be a pattern sometimes in these violent hauntings. But over time, to answer the question there, it seemed like it had initially focused on Betsy. It pleaded with her. This thing over time began to manifest a voice during this haunting. At first they would hear little whistles, little groans, things like that, and eventually it became able to speak. It pleaded with Betsy not to marry Josh Gardner. She eventually broke off that relationship as a result of that. So it began to manifest.
Tim, not to interrupt you, but why do you think that was? Because from what I read, as soon as she broke off the engagement, all that stuff that was happening to her stopped.
Yeah, I don't know. The thing with violent hauntings is they are so undefinable. We don't have all the answers on how it works. We're beginning to understand some of the commonalities of violent hauntings and things like that. I can tell you that they do things that make absolutely no sense. They can seem to be targeting one thing and go a completely opposite route. They can attack you in ways that you never see coming, you never understand. So I don't know with that, but what we do know about it is that it did move from one family member to another, that it targeted initially Betsy, and then, like you said, after that engagement broke up, this thing suddenly started declaring Kate Bat's witch and that it was going to kill John Bell. It not only interacted with the family, but as it gained strength and as the haunting intensified, it began to mess with other members of the community. They would hear it in church. Sunday morning, people would come into church, and all of a sudden they would hear a voice within the congregation. This thing would talk about people who didn't show up for church and what they were doing rather than being in church, that kind of thing. It would talk about infidelities within the community, certain people hooking up with other people, that type of thing, and maybe that's why they weren't in church. This thing would also go to other townships, and it would, at the same time, it appeared to be able to bilocate. It would quote sermons that were being conducted in other townships, and they would go and check, and sure enough, those things had been said in that congregation. So it seemed to be able to be in two places at the same time. But once its focus seemed to shift toward John Bell, that's when the intensity really ramped up. Things became very violent, and it stated and quoted to several people, "I will kill John Bell."
Yeah, there was definitely something there that spirit did not like John. It's a shame all those people are dead. Right now you're getting hearsay and legend.
Right.
But it's strong enough that, and you're right, it's saying that it was supposed to come back 107 years later. But according to what I read, it came back again another 7 years later and sat down and was, well, I don't know if it was sitting, but was having a conversation with John. But let's have coffee, was sitting with John Bell Jr. and talked about the past, the present, and was even given future predictions, and also said that there was a reason why that this spirit went after John Bell Sr., but still wouldn't give the reason why.
Right. I have always considered these things tricksters, that you really, because I counsel families who go through violent hauntings now, and what they say to you is usually, it's not 99% of the time, 100% of the time, false. Incessant lies, that type of thing. It's done to create confusion, to blur the lines of reality, to isolate people one from the other. So I don't get into the actual verbiage of the actual languaging of what these things say. But the amazing fact was that it had a voice to begin with. It's the first documented case that I know of, other than perhaps the Enfield poltergeist, that also was able to manifest the voice as well. There has been some dispute whether those kids were the ones doing it or not, But I think that in the Bell case, all that we really have to go by as far as the story is eyewitness accounts that have been written in diaries and journals from that time, from 1817 to 18, and as the haunting progressed. And the family, after the haunting occurred, they wrote a book. And I believe that the title was called Our Family's Troubles. And it's known as the Red Book, the Little Red Book. And it's still out there. I have a copy that you can get. It's still online. And it has, sketches, early sketches of the house, what it looked like, and the family accounts of what happened there. Sometime later, an article was sometime after the haunting, after John Bell's death, there was a post article that was written that said that they had concocted the whole thing, that it was a big hoax. Betsy threatened to sue, and they, retracted their claim rather immediately as soon as that happened. So, but that story is documented in the Little Red Book, and it's out there for people to read and investigate.
Well, what I
have to
also
get that book, because I'll tell you, the Bell Witch has intrigued me so much that I can never get enough of it. So, what did you say it's called? The Red Book?
I think it's called Our Family's Troubles. I don't know the author's name. It's been written and rewritten and reprinted over the years, but it's generally known as the Little Red Book. And it's out there, and you can get copies of it. If you have a hard time finding it, get in touch with me, and I'll make sure that you get it. John Bell was haunted and plagued by an illness that began to happen during the time of this haunting and the time that this thing was tormenting not only the family but the entire community. around. The town was called Red River. It's in Tennessee. It's now Adams, Tennessee. I've been there. I've been to the cabin that stands there today. I've been to the property. I've seen the cave, all of that stuff. And Trish actually has an interesting story that she about all of that. But John began to notice that there was something going on with his tongue. His tongue began to swell, and he was having problems with his jaw. He said that it felt like somebody had crammed a stick into his teeth, and it began to get difficult for him to eat or to swallow. The last day, this is what eventually kind of did John Bell in. It became almost kind of impossible for him to eat. He began to lose his strength. He began to get weaker and weaker as a result of this. On the last day of his life, we know that he was going from the house to the barn, trying to get out to the barn, and he was with one of his sons. And it was said that the witch was kicking at him, and every time he would take a step, that he would be kicked from the back, from behind, and that it was so violent that his shoes would sometimes fly off his feet. It seemed like every time he took a step, something would kick his feet out from under him, and he would fall to the ground, that type of thing. He tried to get out to the barn. It just wasn't happening. He went back in, and he took to his bed. The next day, he passed away. There was some medications that he was taking at the time, and they noticed one bottle of medicine that seemed a little odd. They weren't quite sure what it was, and they tested it, they checked it out, they smelled it, it smelled pretty strange. They gave the contents of the bottle to one of the barn cats that was there, and it immediately got sick and died. So there is some talk that possibly John Bell was murdered. But the Bell Witch claimed that she was the one that did it, that she had placed this odd medication in with him, and that she was responsible for the death of John Bell. At his funeral, people were there at his funeral, at standing graveside, when they heard a voice come out of the fabric of the air, and it claimed that it did it. It sang songs of delight, that type of thing. And I think that I actually have a copy of one. Somebody wrote down the words of one of them, and it went something like, "Oh, John Bell, I hate you so for the wrongs you've done me," that type of thing. And it declared there at the funeral, "I did it. I killed John Bell." John Bell was buried in the ground that day. The witch stated that it would come back in 7 years' time, and that it would revisit the family, as you said. And that is documented that did happen, that it did return. It said that it would return again sometime later, and all indications are that it did. So when you look at the whole of the haunting, I don't think that you're going to find one out there that probably has more intensity, more violence, more belittling and degrading of a family than probably what happened to the Bell family. It later became the fodder for several books that are out there. There's a lot of people, including descendants of the Bells, who have written books. The one that I told you about is the most, the one that most people look to when they're discussing the Bell Witch haunting, but other descendants along the line have written books as well. And it eventually became movies. There's the Bell Witch movies that are out there. One of them is called An American Haunting. It's pretty popular. That's the most popular one that's out there now. But there are others. And kind of in a nutshell, that's basically the Bell Witch haunting.
Yeah, well, it makes for a very good story.
It does.
That's for
it
sure.
Does.
Well, I don't know. I think there. I know that John was the target for all this, but the fact that here you've got things going on in church, and you hear her talking. It was almost like you think she was, if in fact this is a true story, she was gaining so much energy from the fear of the people from the town.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. There've been a lot of speculation about Betsy Bell and about the energy that was kind of swirling around her at the time. You had this thing going on with her kindergarten teacher, who was several years her senior. And a lot of people, back then that wasn't such an odd thing. And she was slated to marry. And this witch just begged and pleaded, Betsy, please don't have Joshua Gardner. She ended up eventually marrying someone else. So there was all of that going on. Plus, there were rumors that there was probably an inappropriate relationship going on between John Bell and Betsy. So
here's a weird scenario, and I typed this over to Kim.
Okay.
And this just kind of popped into my head, with the Joshua. Now, how much older was Joshua from Betsy? Do you know? Offhand, because
Are you talking to Kim or myself?
I'm talking to you.
With the T.
T-I-M.
For some reason, and don't quote me on this because I don't know, but it was several years her senior. Some people say, I want to say 7 or 17 years age difference between the two. That pops to my mind, but I don't have notes. Unfortunately, I'm not at my home, and I'm not able to get that stuff, so all of this is coming from my feeble brain.
No, the reason why I brought that up, and I'm going to be as delicate as possible on this one, is if he was like 7 years older than her, okay, and that would have been acceptable back then, right. Even if he was 17 years older, because people marry so much younger. Now, in the movie, he's portrayed, John Bell's portrayed as a really old man. Okay, he's fairly old.
Right.
I don't know if he was as old as that appears, but let's just say speculation.
At the time of it, John Bell was 68 years old when it started in 1817.
All right, then let's just, this is just the theory now. Let's just say that John Bell had an affair, had a son outside of marriage, and it happened to be this kindergarten teacher. And that was why the Bell Witch was so insistent, you can't marry this man, he's your brother.
Right.
I don't know, just
it's a possibility. You never know. You never know the intention. The thing that I find with these hauntings, though, is it will find and focus on something like that. Something ridiculous to kind of throw you off guard. And while that's not the original intent at all, it spins and weaves and throws all kinds of a web of lies out there that confuses everyone. There are times when it's said that it was a Native American spirit named Black Dog as well. So you never know really what the foundation behind why it was attacking that family.
Okay, I got two pieces here. Okay, first of all, the dog he shot at was a chupacabra.
A chupacabra?
It could happen.
It could.
And second, I find it most interesting that in John Bell's own words, he called it, when he was bringing in friends to help him, he called it an investigation. So technically, that would have been one of the first official paranormal investigations.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to hear you on that. Say that last part again.
In John Bell's words, he called when he had his friends come over to help him with this problem. He called it an investigation. So that early
I think you could call it that. His neighbors were the Johnstons. The Johnstons were very devout Christians. They were, the secret began to leak out, so to speak. It was something that they couldn't contain in their home. This is back at the time when the pounding on the door was going on, that type of thing, and this thing had come inside, and Betsy was being slapped around and pulled by her hair, that type of thing. The Johnstons came over to stay the night. They were invited by the Bells. They came clean to the Johnstons. They told them what was going on, and there was a big dramatic ritual where the Johnstons, they had the crosses out, and they were reading quotes from the Bible and the whole, be gone demon stuff. And it had absolutely no effect at the time. The entity responded by dragging Betsy Bell around the cabin by her hair again, that kind of thing. So, how interesting would that be if that was like America's first official paranormal ghost team? Huh?
Right, because I mean, John Bell had stated as we investigated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, technically, they did consider themselves the first paranormal team of sorts.
But did they have
Sure.
T-shirts and business cards?
Well, I think that it's probably America's first documented haunting case. Surely there have been probably others before that. I don't know. But as far as actual documentation, I think that the Bell Witch is probably, along with Amityville, and this is going to maybe ruffle some feathers out there, but I've always seen Amityville as well as one of the best documented hauntings of our generation. And I think that back in the 1800s, I think that the Bell Witch, when you look at the eyewitness accounts, you look at the stories that are written in various diaries and journals from that time, as well as the Bell's own transcripts of what occurred, I think that you're looking at probably the America's first haunting, so to speak.
Well, I mean,
Definitely one of the best documented.
back then it really wasn't talked about. I mean, if you had something like that going on, you kept it to yourself. You didn't want the neighbors to think you were crazy or the church
Sure.
to find out or any of that kind of stuff. So for them to speak out and for so much documentation to take place was unreal for that time to begin with.
Absolutely. And when a family, I know this from experience, and you probably do too, when a family gets to a point that they're going outside of their circle, the immediate family circle, to look for help, they're in a pretty dire place.
Yep.
By that time. There's a lot of stuff going on, and we know in that particular haunting case that there were bangings, there were rocks being thrown, what they said were invisible stones being thrown off the roof, the back doors that were being pounded on, whatever it was had come inside. There was the rats gnawing. They had this strange sound that they called lip smacking back and forth. It sounded like something was chewing, the sound of lips smacking. They heard chains dragging through the home at night. And, you think how cliche is it, the typical comedy ghost story, you hear ghosts dragging chains. Well, that's where it originated from, was the Bell haunting, because they heard that sound of chains dragging through the home.
This was the early 1800s.
And by the time the analysis is done and over with, I think you'll find that there's a huge amount of documentation out there. We know the Bells, we know their stories, we know the story of the haunting, we know the stories of the property around the Red River, and I think that you'll find that it's probably one of the most documented hauntings of all time. There have since then been a lot of personal stories of people from present time who have had interaction with spirit, whether that's at the Bell Cave or whether that's in the cabin that now stands there now. There have been some interesting stories that come about that swirl around that energy in the Bell family property.
Well, didn't you take Trish to the Bell Cave?
Trish did have a pretty scary experience that happened there. I can tell you some of it, and she's actually here now behind me in the little car. We were at a book club when you called, and we do a Monday book club, and now we're on the way back home, so she's here and able to tell you that story. I can start it off by telling you that we were coming back from Mid-South, the Mid-South Paranormal Conference, and if you have ever driven between Nashville and Louisville, Kentucky to go to Mid-South, you've driven right past the Bell family property. It's in a town now called Adams, Tennessee, and it's along that long stretch of highway that goes between Nashville and Louisville, Kentucky. About halfway, it's up around Mammoth Cave and Horse Cave and in that area. And you'll find a little exit, and it says Adams, Tennessee on it. And we were driving by, and I saw it, and I said, Trish, man, we got to take a little side trip. She looked at me like I was crazy, and I said, one of the most famous hauntings in the world, in history, took place just here in this town, and I'd like to find it. And so she put up with me, and we went into the town of Athens, which back then was called Red River. And we drove up and down. There's only like 4 roads in the whole town, a water tower and a grocery store. You know, that's about it. And we were driving around trying to find it. We stopped at this place to get lunch and to ask for directions, you know, and find out what we could find. And Trish began to notice that she was getting herself into trouble. And with that, I'll turn you over to her, okay? So hold on.
All right, how did I get pulled into this?
Hi, Trish.
Hi, Trish.
How are you tonight?
Lovely.
You're doing
So-
well, so
Yeah,
so I hear we're talking.
Bell Witch.
Bell Witch.
So Bell Witch, yeah, you know what, I don't know, you guys may or may not know about me is I don't come from paranormal circles, and so I don't know a lot of the stories or the names, and when he said he wanted to go find this place, I thought, yeah, whatever, and we actually did some little scenery hopping around looking for sceneries, yeah, and we found in retrospect, as we got off the highway, the songs were like Highway to Hell, Hell's Bells, you know, like over and over and over, there were all these songs that were, you know, House of the Devil and this and that and the other and all this kind of stuff. And so when we were looking through to try to find the place, we found the cave, tourist attraction, but that's not where the house was. And when we finally got to a place where Tim wanted to kind of say, okay, well, let's stop and figure out what's going on, as we were driving toward, I started to notice that I was feeling rather ill, and I felt like my jaws were kind of tightening up, clenching up, and the back of my tongue was swelling. And the first thing I thought was I must have eaten something or breathed something, you know, somewhere that I was having an allergic reaction to, because it was getting pretty severe. And I knew that Tim wanted to find this thing, but I was getting worse and worse. And I was starting to think, oh my God, we're going to have to find a hospital, and I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I don't even know if there's a hospital around here, because I was having a hard time breathing after a while. And he thought that I was just getting mad at taking the side trip. You know, I was getting bored and wanted to go home and you know, get home to home and family. But I was really kind of getting scared at that point that there was something really, really wrong with me. And finally, we were out taking pictures by the Bell Witch sign, or by by where the sign was, and Tim said to the waitress when we were at this little restaurant, you know, where is the house? We know that the house is near here. And I was at my critical mass, and she said, oh, you're here. It's right here in the parking lot. And, you know, I'm distressed, and I'm having problems, but Tim, you know, took some pictures. And so he's just thinking, like I say, that I'm mad. Well, when he realized it was kind of worse, he said to me, look, we'll just go ahead and go. What is wrong with you? And I said, Tim, I'm not mad. I'm having problems. And I said, I feel like somebody has shoved something in the back of my jaw, and my tongue is swelling, and I don't know what's going on. And his eyes got big as saucers, and he said, get in the car right now. And I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking he's taking me to the hospital. And he drove away like 80 miles an hour down this road back toward the interstate. And I'm telling you, within 30 seconds, I started to feel better. Within a mile, I felt much better. Within 2 miles, I felt like me again. And it would be, if you would have told me I would have felt better like that, it would have been like somebody breaking your arm and saying, give it 10 minutes, you'll feel better. I mean, that's how drastically horrible I was feeling. And he said to me once he got a few miles away and I was okay, he pulled off to the side of the road and he said, well, you know, do you know the story of the Bell Witch? And I said, no, why? What's going on? And he said, well, you scared me half to death because the symptoms that you were describing are precisely what John Bell wrote in his diary, and I have the Bell Witch book in the trunk. I'm going to get out and get it and show you. I want you to read what you were just talking about. And sure enough, in the book that Tim had bought at Mid-South about the Bell Witch, it described it in almost the same words that I used, the symptoms that I was having. And that just terrified me. That was just like, to think that a place or a time, an area can hold that kind of energy, that somebody who doesn't even know about it could pick it up, was really, really kind of a reality check for me as to what this stuff can do to some people, But it wasn't a fun thing. I don't ever want to do it again.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, it was really frightening.
That had to be a very unpleasant experience.
Yeah, well, we left there and we ended up calling Stephen LaChance and Denise Jones, from whose son was the basis for The Sixth Sense. We spoke with them quite at length, about what had happened and what I was feeling and what I was scared of, and it was kind of a real turning point for me as to paranormal things and what kind of effect this might have on people. So yeah,
we got you
that.
coughing now, talking about it.
Yeah, really. Yeah. So, we were just at a book club, so I've been talking for about 2.5 hours so far. So we were in our little discussion group.
We appreciate you joining in. That was definitely an experience. And we're getting the message from our producer. We need to say goodbye. Our time is up.
Well, let me give you back to Tim to do that. Hold on.
Thank you, Trish.
Thank you.
Oh, what, you're done with us already? It's already, let's see, it's after 9 here.
Yeah.
That's right. We have another show coming on after us, but we really want to thank you for coming on and joining us tonight. We know you're not home, you're on the road, and you did an excellent job, and you kept my interest going that I want to know even more, so I'm definitely going to go after that book. If anybody wants to get
a couple of things.
Right.
Well, you can get a hold of us at timyancy.com or encounterslive.com. My email address is timyancy@comcast.net. My address, no, I'm not just kidding. Anyway,
his address is where all the cats are.
Thank you so much. There is lots of stuff out there about the Bell Witch, so Google it. Find a guy named Fitzhugh, Patrick Fitzhugh. He's an actual descendant of the Bell Witch and probably the most foremost authority out there on the Bell Witch. His name is Patrick Fitzhugh.
You got it. Thank you so much, Tim, and thank Trish for us. And we'll be seeing you in Facebook land.
Thank you, Tim.
Yes, you will. I actually have some really cool announcements coming up soon as far as possibly a television series and a potential return to radio, and I'll let you know about that on your show. That's where we'll expose it to the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Well, that's going to be it for tonight. I have one announcement. Don't forget, I'll be at the Shanley Hotel this weekend. There are just a few rooms left for Friday night, October 25th. If you're interested, www.shanleyhotel.com. And Kim?
Yeah, say goodnight because we are